Okay, and we are live. Good morning, everybody. Thank you again for joining. And as I said in my brief intro this morning, thank you to everybody that is listening to all of this, watching all of this, sharing your stories. I'm joined this morning, first thing, by Rachel Haith. Hey, Rachel.
Morning.
I'm excited to happy New Year and all of that. I'm excited to see. I'm really excited to see where the conversation goes this morning. So we'll get started with that. Again, if you are watching, please share with the hashtag this is burnout for any of the posts, any of the stories, anything that you are sharing this week. Hashtag this is burnout. So Rachel, before we kind of get into your burnout experience, your burnout story, just tell us a little bit about you. Who's Rachel and what is it that you do?
Okay, so I'm Rachel Haith, and my mission in life is helping people to believe in themselves. That will become a bit clearer as to why when we talk about what's happened. But as a coach, I feel it's really important to help people develop really strong self-belief and empower themselves. I think there are so many people out there who don't feel empowered. So the work I do is all about supporting people to empower themselves, take back control, and be living the life that makes them, content, happy, all those good things about when you feel good about your own life.
I love that. Taking back control. Don't we all wish we could take back a little bit more control?
Indeed.
How fabulous will that be? And as you said, I think a lot of that is going to become more apparent as we go through talking about your experience. So let's start with that. And again, thank you. Before we go into that, I know a little bit about your story. We've had some previous conversations.
Yes.
I don't know all of the detail of where today is going to go. I want to say thank you for sharing and being prepared to share. And yeah, let's dig in. So tell us first, when did you experience burnout?
So it was back in 2006, so before children, and I was in the relatively early days of my career as an officer in the Royal Air Force. I'd joined the Royal Air Force back in 2001, and I'd signed on for a 16-year permanent commission, so a 16-year contract essentially. So I was really committed to being in the Air Force. I went for the longest you could apply for straight away. I think a huge part of that was probably my as a child, I was taken to lots of military shows and the Royal Tournament and all those sorts of things, and I think that rubbed off on me. But I'd joined as a fighter controller, which may not mean much to some people. The best way to describe it to most people is if you think back to the Second World War and the ladies in the ops room pushing around air raids on a big plotting table, the modern version of that with use of radars and computers and all that stuff. So it was quite a stressful job, controlling aircraft, making sure you've got a huge responsibility for flight safety. You've essentially got people's lives in your hands. And I never found it easy. It wasn't a job that, they talk about aptitude. I was tested for aptitude, and I had the aptitude for fighter control. I would argue, and I think there's been realizations perhaps since then, that there are maybe even levels of aptitude. It's not that you've got it or you haven't. And so by 2006, it took a long time to get through the training system, which didn't help. There were lots of delays, which were nothing to do with me, just an inescapable issue with the training system, essentially. So it all became quite drawn out. And when it got to 2006, I'd been doing the job in earnest for 3 years by then. So essentially, through the protracted training period, which I found hard, and then through the period of doing the job for real, the stress levels just grew and grew and grew. It was something that really built over quite a period of time. And at the time when I was going through it, it was difficult. I knew it wasn't right. I knew I was suffering, and I knew it wasn't right. And I knew I didn't know what I was heading for, but I knew I was heading for something, for a place that wasn't good.
Yeah.
But it was a very elitist environment to be in, which I know will resonate for lots of people in many different types of scenario.
Yeah.
But that need, whether it's self-imposed or not, which a lot of it probably was, but that need to be as good as everyone else, to be seen, to be doing your bit, to be that desire to be viewed as good at what you were doing. Because, let's face it, it was a difficult job. When you're controlling aircraft, there's a lot going on. You've got to keep them safe from other aircraft whilst trying to have a pretend practice aerial battle. So there's lots of inherent dangers, and but everyone wants to be great at it. And it was a very elitist environment, and I just felt I had to keep going. I couldn't possibly tell anybody that I was suffering, and that the public face of me at the time was absolutely fine. There was no issues whatsoever, which again I feel will resonate with many
definitely
scenarios. But on the inside and behind closed doors, tears, depression, physical symptoms of nausea and panic attacks and all that kind of stuff. But it just, I think it never truly occurred to me that I really ought to say something. It was that internal struggle, I think, of the need to perform, the need to not let my colleagues down.
Yeah.
The need to be seen as being good, and that I deserved to be there, balanced against that deep down knowledge that I knew I shouldn't be there, and it wasn't the right place for me. But coming round to realizing that is, I think, for all of us, a very difficult thing to achieve. And it came to a head in 2006. So it had got a lot worse in the preceding months to that, and I can remember, because it happened early on in 2006, and I can remember the Christmas beforehand was just, behind closed doors. My husband put up with an awful lot of just all the emotion coming out, and me trying to work through the fog or the spaghetti that was in my head.
Yeah.
And the build up. So I was going through what's called combat ready training, which is once you've qualified as a fighter controller, or specifically as a weapons controller was what it used to be called back then, you then have to go through combat ready training of various different and more complicated elements.
Right.
So that if you then are deployed in an operational scenario, you've got all the relevant, it's building your toolkit, same as you would in a profession. And I was a couple of sorties away from being combat ready, and I needed to do a sortie where you get two air tankers, air-to-air refueling tankers. So they're big aircraft, and you have to put them together in the sky to refuel from each other.
Right.
So that's quite complicated. That's why
I was going to say that is I think I've seen it done in a movie once, Rachel.
Yeah.
And it looked complicated then.
Exactly. And when you're used to dealing with fast jet aircraft that move quickly, they turn on a sixpence, you can put them in the same bit of sky. It's not easy to put them in the same bit of sky, but the levers you've got to work with are quicker.
Yeah. Whereas
this one was a lot more complicated. And I can remember I felt utterly sick when I was told, oh, Rachel, because at the time I was one of the senior controllers, would you believe, where I was posted. And they said, you've been allocated the cell tanker sortie this morning. And I just died inside. I had to leave the building because I thought I was physically going to be sick.
Oh, wow.
It just caused such anxiety. And I didn't end up doing it. I, went and saw a doctor and kind of was signed off for the day or whatever it was. I should have perhaps taken that as a warning sign, because that was one of the most extreme physical reactions that I'd had.
Yeah.
What was going on. And that should have, with hindsight being a wonderful thing.
Hindsight is wonderful, isn't it?
Yeah, isn't it just? That was a huge signal that I wasn't coping and that I was on the edge, really, really on the edge. Fast forward, I can't actually remember, it seems so long ago now, I can't remember how long, but it wasn't all that long afterwards. I was put in charge of an exercise that needed to happen. So essentially what that means is that there would be a lot of aircraft involved. So I ended up controlling, I think I had 12 aircraft that I was talking to.
Right.
Some of whom were foreign, so that brought in sort of accents, and it's sometimes a bit more difficult to understand on a radio when you've got different nationalities talking. And I was to have 30 aircraft come across the North Sea to pretend my 12. So all the planning had gone into this exercise. There was loads of people involved. The entire ops room, that was the only thing that was happening in the ops room. So there's all the different people in there doing all their different jobs to support that mission. And I started it, and I was talking to my 12, and the 30 were coming across the North Sea. And essentially, I'm the idea is that I'm then supposed to be calling a picture, telling my 12 aircraft, that's where the enemy is. That's where you need to go and defend the UK. And all I can describe it as is something snapped in my brain. I just completely disintegrated, if you like. I burst into floods of tears. I couldn't speak. I couldn't function. I just couldn't do anything. My poor, because when you're controlling, you have an assistant sat next to you who's a lot more sort of junior than you in rank. So you're in charge of them, if you like. And this poor chap sat next to me must have wondered what on earth was going on. He kind of did his best to support me. And if it hadn't been for an instructor who I respected enormously, incredible operator, and just a nice guy with it.
Yeah.
And he was sat a couple of consoles over from me, and he just looked at me and he said, "Rachel, take a deep breath, carry on." And I just did. The training kicked in, if you like. The years of training and doing the job for real just kicked in. And through the tears and the sort of heaving sobs, I finished the sortie. I have no memory of what that sortie actually entailed. I think I've probably blanked it. I don't suppose it was very good, but it happened. And then it finished, and I came straight out of the ops room, and I went to see my boss, and I just said, I can't do this anymore. I never want to do that again. And I explained to him everything about the way I'd been feeling, about the physical symptoms, about the depression, the anxiety. And fortunately for me, he was so supportive. I could not have asked for more. He was incredible.
Yeah.
And he even said, I remember his words, something along the lines of, "Rachel, I had no idea. You're one of my senior controllers. I had no idea about any of this. You looked like you were fine." And that for me kind of sums up the whole situation of any kind of burnout, where everyone thinks you're fine.
Well, we mask it well, right? And again, I think that's been a common theme from all of the conversations that I've had so far this week, and I know will come in, the ones that I still have to come.
Yeah.
But I think, like you said, like it's outwardly, we do look fantastic, right? We've got, we're put together, we are focused, we are controlling. But I think, as you said there so brilliantly, I think there is that inner, I have to keep going. I have to show that I'm the best. I have to show that I'm good enough. I have to show all of this stuff. And it's almost like it's that takes hold of you inside.
Yes.
That causes the masking and the stress and the anxiety and everything else to rise. Because inside, isn't it? It is, you have to be the best, right? Not even the best, right? You just have to be enough.
You just need to be good enough
you are
as everyone else.
And you've got to keep on going. And I think the reality of it is, and as you just said there, right, as far as your boss was concerned, right, you were one of the best controllers. And and I think that's also the kind of bit, like, there's no evidence, certainly from what, like, my experience or anybody else that I've spoken to or speak to, there's no evidence that says, Rachel, you weren't good enough.
No.
But inside it is, I have to show that I'm good enough. I have to show that I'm good enough. And I think the reality is that you were, but inwardly there was something telling you no, and that was the push and the stress and all of that sort of stuff, wasn't it? So boss says to you, I have no idea. What then kind of happens for you?
So that was really interesting what happened next, because I had a real mixed experience of support and, quite frankly, not. So the big question then became, what do we do with Rachel? Because I'd been trained to do a certain job. It was clear that I could no longer do that job. And obviously I was put under the care of the Defence Mental Health Services to receive treatment as well. So obviously everything, I was very well looked after in that way, exceptionally well looked after. But running alongside that, it's the big question mark, what happens to the future of Rachel's career? I still had another 11 years to serve. So what happens next? So the initial response that I got on that front, my boss and his boss were both very supportive. And because, I was well respected as an officer, the job aside, the role, I was well respected as an officer, and they wanted to keep me in the branch because, and that was nice. They didn't want to lose me from the branch. And a very senior officer who was essentially in charge of the whole force of fighter control personnel for the Air Force, he rang me personally and said, we would really like to keep you in the branch. You're a great officer, or words to that effect. Would you consider doing one of the other roles that's available in the ops room environment still? Because essentially there's two roles. You're either controlling the aircraft, or you're one of the people that identifies the radar picture to say who's who and what's what.
Right. Yeah.
And so the two work very, very closely together. So out of respect for him, because I respected him an enormous amount, I said, okay, I will give it a try because you've asked me to, but I worry that the same sort of thing might then happen, because I was very aware by this point that that kind of environment is what had led me to burn out and to have.
But I suppose essentially you are at that point putting, sorry, I've got stuff coming up all over the place and everything should be on Do Not Disturb. But essentially you've got you're considering this other option because of what you feel about somebody else.
Yes.
But what I'm not hearing you say is that it sounded like this was a really good option for me.
I knew it was not a good option for me.
Okay.
The difficulty, because one of the things that had happened in the meantime, which was less than good treatment of me in the situation I was in is that I was warned I might be chucked out of the service. So my career was very much on the line. There were options to perhaps do a completely different role within the Air Force, but none of that was guaranteed. And it might be that I just get discharged from the Air Force.
And at that point, did you still wanted to stay within the Air Force?
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which made it quite a difficult position to be in. I was even told I might get sent out of area for 6 months on ops whilst it was all being sorted out what they were going to do with me, which clearly that was the last thing I needed to hear at the time. But once I was asked this question, again, it was this real internal fight, because I knew it was the wrong thing. I knew that I needed to get well, and I knew that being in that environment was it was all too fresh, and it was not the place for me. So I duly then went to retrain, or to attempt to retrain, if you like, just for a 2-week module. So it's the module that I had done a few years previously, where they decide whether you're going to be a controller or whether you're going to do the surveillance, that other role within the ops room. So I had to redo that 2-week element. And so I was put with a course of other people that were doing the course anyway. And it was a horrendous 2 weeks, because every time I went near, because it's all done on a simulator, so this isn't even real anymore. It's all done on simulation. But every time I sat down on console to do a sortie, you're still under the same kind of now pressure. The role isn't the same, because you don't have flight safety as a direct responsibility. But it's so important that you identify all the aircraft correctly and in a timely fashion. It was too much. I kept having similar responses. I would just get completely overwhelmed. I'd burst into tears. It was just horrendous. But
and if we look at burnout as the definition, as the World Health Organization have described, as burnout being this chronic workplace stress, right? So high periods of intense stress for a long time. So you've come out of that to go into another situation almost immediately. Yeah. So you've gone from one high stress environment into another high stress environment whilst you're.
Oh, I've lost you. Hello? Oh dear. Hello?
Hey, I think I'm back. I think you'd been there the whole time. Sorry. It looks like even with me moving to a different address, I'm still having internet issues, for which I apologise.
Oh, bless you.
Rachel, sorry.
That's quite all right. So what we got to, we're talking about the fact that it was almost out the frying pan into the fire, back into the same thing, which again, when I look back on it, it was useful in a way to do that, because when when they were looking at options of kind of what to do with me, if you like, I was able to prove to them that this environment was not a suitable place for me to be anymore.
Right, okay.
So
and you felt that was important at that time, did you? Being able to prove that I'm in the wrong place.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I fully realised that before I did the 2 weeks.
Okay.
Before I did the 2 weeks, I just knew how it would go. I just knew. But going through it, I think it added to my credibility somehow, in that I had shown some fortitude and some determination to at least try, which they respected. But even they had to agree, yeah, this is the wrong place to be for you. Do
you think, and again, we've said hindsight is a wonderful thing, haven't we? Do you think if you'd have said at the time, like, I can't even try it, like, I just know this isn't going to work, do you think things could have ended up very differently for you? Do you think you might you have lost some of that respect and credibility, do you think?
Potentially, yes. And I think it would have, my circumstance and my situation would potentially have had a much more negative view on it by the service, which could potentially have, I mean, we don't know, but could potentially have led down that route of being discharged from the service.
Right. And you still didn't want that, right? You still want to stay part of the service.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was the one thing I knew.
To you?
I think, you know, it almost didn't occur to me to not want to be in the service, if that makes any sense.
Right, okay.
One of my core values is service, and I think that's one of the reasons I was so attracted to join the Air Force in the first place.
Right.
And I was, you know, when you go through training, you're very much officer first, job specialisation second. And I knew I was a good officer, and I'm not trying to blow my own trumpet when I say that. You know, that was reflected in.
I think you're entitled to blow away, Rachel.
Let's hope so. And I suppose my thought process, which you could argue is actually partly to do with the indoctrination of being in that kind of environment, I suppose. But because it was officer first, specialist second, it almost didn't occur to me to not want to be an officer anymore. And I think because despite everything that had happened, I had already, in that first 5 years of service, had some incredible experiences. You know, and again, you could come back to whether part of that is to do with the indoctrination, but I had met some great people. I'd met my husband to be. I'd had some incredible experiences. I'd been overseas, and I had met a lot of officers who were in charge of me at various points, who were incredible. So I guess looking back on it, I believed that there was still great things about the service. I just didn't like and couldn't do the job that I'd been employed to do.
Okay.
But all the other things around that, I mean, again, this if you compare to anyone in a similar situation, perhaps in corporate, they're going to have very much the same sorts of responsibilities. You know, I was in charge of loads of people. Well, they're going to have similar responsibilities, and it's not just about doing the role. It's about what you do with your people and the environment that you create as the person in charge, all of that stuff. But because I think the way the military and reporting is perhaps set up, you know, annual reporting, it's very much around your officer skills, so how you are at looking after your people and being a leader and all that stuff, and then separately almost the skills in the role that you fulfill. It's kind of not separate, but it is. if that makes any sense. I'm not sure if it's quite as considered in a, they're very much meshed together, but they're looked at a bit separately, and I don't know if that's quite the same.
And I suppose in a corporate setting, I suppose if I just kind of take that where maybe some I'm sure we can all relate to what it is that you're saying, but I think if we were look at it as a corporate setting, 9 times out of 10, what happens in a corporate setting is you're really good at the job specific stuff.
Yeah.
And so therefore, we want to promote you into a job specific managerial or leadership role. But actually, a lot of times what happens within corporate is that we don't give you the leadership or the management or leadership skills in order to be a great leader or manager. We just say you're really good at the job specific stuff. You're bound to be a really, really great manager. But again, and I suppose I can relate a little bit more to what you're saying there in terms of the separation of the two in the forces, and I've got a son in the forces who is going through his kind of first training for his next, his current training for his next level promotion.
Yeah.
And there is very separate, this is the job specific training that he needs to be doing to get to the next level. And this is the management training, the leadership training that we're going to put you on in order to be a great leader. And I think we miss that in corporate. So I think with what you're saying there, actually, I think that in some ways, and I suppose then, I can kind of look at it and say, I can really understand why you would have wanted to stay, because you were a great leader, potentially just in the completely wrong role.
Yes. Yeah. And I guess when you term it like that, I was fortunate to be in the environment I was in, because in other environments that might not have been the case, just because of the way it's constructed. So I very much wanted to stay, and I really enjoyed the rest of my career. There were, I do feel there were some quite a lot of detrimental impacts from what had happened over future career progression, quite substantially. But long story short, what happened in the end is they let me change branch completely. So I then went into logistics, which, funnily enough, I don't know if irony is the right word to describe it, but when I went to university, I did a degree in logistics.
Right.
You'd think the Air Force might have employed me as a logistics officer right from the start, because that was my specialism. Anyway, but they didn't. But I ended up, I always felt that, I do believe some things happen, or a lot of things happen for a reason. And I do believe that I ended up where I was supposed to be all along. And I don't regret any of what happened, because it's a huge part of what's made me who I am today. Yeah. And, I was able to navigate that, come out the other side, and for me personally, it's had a hugely positive effect on my life since. But they did eventually, once I'd done this 2 weeks, they said, you're right, this isn't going to work. Wrote me a really lovely, very strong recommendation to be kept in the service, because that was the key thing. Does she deserve to stay in the service? And I felt I did. And I got this really strong recommendation that yes, no matter what, keep this person in the service, but find something else for her to do. And then I went and retrained to be.
So can I ask, Rachel? So in terms of that, so at the point that you said, like I'm not coping, like the stress too much, right? You've got a great boss that then says to you, right, what do we need to do? They start looking at other roles. It's not perfect, but even, that's not the fit either. You're saying, I still want to stay. You're getting these recommendation letters and all of those sorts of things. And again, we can talk, hindsight is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
Do you think if you had addressed it earlier, before you got to that point of the nausea, the sickness, the anxiety, the depression, the burnout? Do you think if you'd have gone to somebody beforehand and said, like, I'm not coping, do you think you would have got the same level of support?
That's an interesting question. Potentially, I think it would have depended at which point I'd said something, because there were a number of warning signs from the very first moment that I started my training in fighter control.
Right.
So when I did that initial foundation course the first time, I had to redo it because I didn't do as well as they'd hoped, so I had to redo it. That was the first sign. When we then finished the course, so you then go on to do further training, but now working with live aircraft.
Yeah.
There were moments in that training where I really struggled. Then I was sent to the Falkland Islands for 4 months to do controlling down there. And when I came back, because it's very benign airspace in the Falklands, it's not like the UK where there's airspace filled with aeroplanes taking people on holiday, private pilots doing what are their sort of jolly little flights, whatever they're doing.
Yeah.
And the skill fade I experienced in that 4 months was quite horrific. So when I then got back, I did really badly. I had to be put back into the training system to almost be retrained, partly I think to get my confidence back, but also to try and make me perform better, I think.
And I was going to say, though, as you were talking there, it was confidence that sprung to mind. And again, hindsight is a wonderful thing. But do you think the confidence knock then almost contributed to you feeling like you had to push harder to prove that you were good enough?
Yes, definitely. That I'd say that was a huge part of it. Because
we
again,
see all the kind of pieces coming together in terms of what happened. So you then you moved to logistics.
Yeah.
It fit for you. Everything's good.
Yes, I mean, in terms of the roles I was doing, because being in logistics, essentially, you're either moving things or people from place to place in broad terms. But it was very much more a people-facing job. So fighter control, I mean, it's not always done in bunkers now, but when I started, it was all done from underground bunkers. And there was lots of banter within the Air Force about bunker dwellers. They never come up for daylight and they never see daylight. All this sort of stuff.
Okay. Yeah.
And it's you do work as a team, but it's a very singular type of work.
Right.
Whereas logistics, very early on as a logistics officer, you're in charge of loads of people who are all doing various different types of jobs depending which area you're doing. And it's much more about, I guess, project management to a degree, managing the various things that need to go on and managing your people. I mean, you do manage people as a fighter controller. I'm giving the wrong impression there, but it's work that's all about people. Whereas when you're doing fighter control, it's work that's all about aircraft and sorties and achieving the right qualifications, and it's kind of different. Whereas the output in logistics, it's much more defined, but it's people facing, and that was the bit for me that made all the difference. I thrived on being around people all the time rather than a radar screen. And all the face-to-face conversations, the opportunities to help people develop in whatever role it was that they were doing, and also the opportunity to learn, because I was having to start again. I was 5 years in to a 16-year career and having to start again. So there was a lot of learning, which was exciting and interesting because it was something I had a background in, but not in the Air Force. And so I met a whole swathe of new people that I would never have come across if I'd stayed working in bunkers, if you like. And I was able to do some really interesting roles in my remaining time in the Air Force. And I can genuinely, hand on heart, say that I did enjoy the rest of my career. I mean, it wasn't that I hadn't enjoyed anything about fighter control, but my time in logistics was fantastic. The only problem, I guess, is that it was marred by what had happened when I was doing fighter control. I was warned, this will get in the way of your promotion prospects if you continue down this route of not doing fighter control anymore, which I always thought was grossly unfair, because if I'm a good officer and I then become a good logistics officer instead, I'm doing the things I need to, that you're meant to.
Oh, we lost you. When you get those feelings that today is going to be, maybe it's not, maybe it's not the internet, maybe it's the streaming platform. Is Rachel still talking? Rachel looks like she's frozen. Let's see what we can do here and add her back in, see if that makes a difference. If you're watching us live or if you're watching on replay, Rachel may be talking. I might be sat here talking to myself, but let's see. Rachel's gone, so maybe it is something at Rachel's end. Hopefully she'll be back. It's maybe a streaming issue, mightn't it? So whilst we're just waiting for Rachel to come back in, as I said, up next I will be speaking to Julie Turney. I'll be speaking to her at 11 o'clock. I think I think some of the really positive stuff that I'm hearing from this conversation with Rachel is the support that she got when she finally asked for help. From some of the earlier conversations this week, this asking for help, this talking about what it is that we need, has been, I suppose, a really key element, right? There is, amongst those of us that are sharing our stories, there is this want and need to continue to prove ourselves, to continue to prove that we are enough. And I think a lot of that then stops us from asking for the help when we need the help, right? We're not asking for what we need when we need it. But a lot of the time we don't necessarily know that we need it in the first place, because we can't always see that there is an issue. And so I think it's kind of breaking this cycle, isn't it? Rachel's talking about some of the signs that were there very, very early on, but her internal want and need to continue to go, right? To prove that I am good enough, that I can do this. But that internal driver was then causing her to not ask for the help when she needed the help. And again, that's really common. So I think just from today's conversation, if you need help, ask for it. Again, Rachel is showing, even in some of what many of us would probably consider a really, really tough environment, Rachel was able to get the help and support that she needed. She's just said there, certainly depended on the level that she was at, and there seemingly were then consequences of her moving into a different discipline. I think what I'm very strong on, actually, when it comes to speaking to all of my clients as we kind of navigate what next after burnout. I mean, my ideal is that we stop everybody getting to the point of burnout in the first place. But I'm always conscious of, actually, is it the environment that's right for you, with what you now know about yourself as a result of burnout? And I think we need to continue to ask those questions. Rachel looks like she's back, so let's let Rachel finish before we kind of go. I would say maybe I've moved into my parents for like 2 days, and it's nothing to do with the internet connection. Maybe it is actually the system.
Oh dear. Yeah.
But thank you,
Sorry,
thank you for coming back to us. No, you're fine. Thank you for coming back. I was just doing a bit of a recap and summary as to what you've been sharing for us. So before I kind of let you go, so again, I'm conscious of time and kind of next step. If you, what's the one thing that you would want people to know about burnout that we maybe just don't talk about very often?
I think it's that we can be our own worst enemy.
Mm-hmm.
This need, wherever it comes from, to push on through and to still be seen as, you know, best or good enough or whatever it is you're striving for. I almost feel like there should be something in the education system, if you like, to tell us that and encourage the message that why would you do that to yourself if you know that something's not right? Have the confidence, have the self-belief to do something about it. The problem being, as we all know, that confidence and self-belief can be a real issue for many people. And when you're going through something like that, understandably, your confidence takes a knock. And because of that, you're then even more desperate to appear as if everything is fine. And so you kind of end up in this cycle. So it's the fact that we're our own worst enemy. And I guess spreading the message that it's okay to feel that confliction. Yeah. Maybe it's best to do something about it rather than persevere and push through. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you. Great place to stop. Rachel, before I let you go, where can people get hold of you or find out more about you?
Okie dokie. So if people go to www.inspiredlifegroup.com, .co.uk, get that one right. So inspiredlifegroup.co.uk, then all the things about me are on there. People can get in contact with me, find out a bit more about my offerings, and I'd love to chat. If this has resonated for anybody, then I'd love to chat further.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rachel. And I want to say thank you for sharing, because again, I think there are so many similarities and so many takeaways that we can relate to all different sorts of careers and different walks of life, right? So thank you hugely for sharing. If you have found this interview useful, which I'm sure you have, then again, please share, please comment, #ThisIsBurnout. Rachel Haith, you'll find her on LinkedIn, and do go and check out Rachel's website, so inspiredlifegroup.co.uk. You'll find all of the details there. Thank you very much for listening. I'm going to be back with you in just under 10 minutes with my next guest, Julie Turney. For now, I will say goodbye and thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks, Rachel.